Hello, everybody. It is Miss Akridge. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about characterization. Now, I grouped together a couple of things along with characterization just so we could review a lot of fictional elements at once. So this is going to review characterization, protagonist, antagonist, and point of view. But they're all connected because they all have to do with characters in a fictional work. So it'll all go together in the end. But we're going to start with some characterization. So, characterization is the description of a character's distinctive features and nature. So, characterization is quite simply just a pretty detailed description of your character. As far as features and nature go, features are physical. That's the easiest way to remember. Features and physical. Think about the way the character looks physically. Weight, build, eye color, hair color, tattoos, sound of their voice, clothing style, etc. All right. Nature refers to the character's personality. So think about the way they act, how they treat other people. Are they mean? Are they nice, caring, giving, thoughtful, introverted, extroverted, and everything in between? Now, outside of, just the general definition of characterization, there are two different types of characterization: direct and indirect. So direct characterization tells the reader exact characteristics using narration or quotes from another character. So narrator might be talking about this person and tell us exactly what this character looks like, or another character might be using dialogue to tell us what this character is like. Here is an example right here. Bill was short and fat, and his bald spot was widening with every passing year. That is a very direct description of our character Bill. Now, pop quiz, what part of speech do we see repeated in this direct characterization? And if you chose adjectives, you were right. Adjectives are mostly used to display direct characterization. You can see in our example, we have at least 3 adjectives: short, fat, bald. Adjectives are very direct descriptors. That's why they go with direct characterization. Now, pop quiz, does this example tell us about Bill's nature or his features? Now, if we remember, nature refers to personality, while features are physical. So we're talking about how short he is, how wide he is, and how bald he is. That sounds like physical characteristics to me. So we're going to go with features. I skipped a page. There we go. Yes, it is features. Here's another example that of direct characterization that uses quotes from another character. So, of course, we're going to have some dialogue in this example because it is a quote from another character. And it says, quote, "Jane is a cruel person," end quote, she said. Now, the reason we know this is direct characterization is we've got a big fat adjective right here. So that should automatically cue us in that, hey, we're looking at some direct characterization. Now, pop quiz, does this tell us about Jane's nature or her features? Now, remember, features are physical. As I'm looking in this example, I'm not seeing any physical descriptions of Jane, but I am seeing a description of her personality. She's a cruel person. So we're going to go with nature on this one. All right, moving on from direct characterization, let's look at some indirect characterization. So this type of characterization shows the reader certain characteristics through actions. So direct tells you directly. That's why they call it direct characterization. Indirect is going to be more of a description. It's going to take longer to describe your character. The author is showing you what they are like, not telling you. And usually this is done through action. How are they acting in this scene? This can include dialogue, things they say, or hobbies and interests. What do they do in their spare time? So let's take that first example with our short, fat, bald Bill and turn that direct characterization into indirect characterization. And it might go a little something like this. Bill sighed as he looked at the offer of a gym membership. He should really join, but just thinking about it made beads of sweat collect at the top of his bald spot. Now you'll see that while direct characterization from the last example did get the job done, he's short, fat, and bald, this example, this indirect characterization, is a little bit more engaging. It gives the reader something more to chew on. So while direct characterization used adjectives, what part of speech do we see repeated in indirect characterization? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with action. Which part of speech shows action? If you guessed verbs, you got it right. Verbs are mostly used to display indirect characterization. Look at all the verbs we have here. Bill sighed. He was thinking about it. Beads of sweat were collecting. We have all kinds of verbs in here. We are showing action. All right. Going back to our Jane is a cruel person example, we're going to take that direct characterization and turn it into indirect characterization. So here's the example. As Jane walked past the box labeled free puppies, she quickly glanced around her. When she saw no one was looking, she gave the box a swift kick. Now, I don't know about y'all, but only cruel people would kick a box of puppies, all right? But no one directly told us she was cruel. We inferred it through her actions. And that is what makes indirect characterization indirect. But, it's not just actions. Indirect characterization also includes dialogue and hobbies. So another way that we could show Jane was a cruel person, we could have a conversation. We could see or read a conversation between Jane and another character, where Jane might be calling names or, stealing lunch money or something like that. Her dialogue, her actions would show that she is a cruel character. Not a nice fellow. Jane is not. All right, here is an example, a really good example of direct characterization from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which if you haven't read, you should read it. It's a really good book. But as we move through, be looking for examples of direct characterization. So you should be looking for some adjectives. Here we go. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was because all he had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of Scotch tape because of all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead that was shaped like a bolt of lightning. Now, there were lots and lots and lots of adjectives in there to catch, but here they are. We have small, we have skinny, we have thin, knobbly, black, bright green eyes, round, thin. All right, lots of adjectives. So we know this is direct characterization. On quizzes and tests, this is fair game for a question. You will be presented a passage, and I'm going to ask you if the passage contains direct or indirect characterization. All right, you should be able to look at the passage and pick out either mainly adjectives or mainly verbs and be able to denote whether it's direct or indirect. Now, I was reading it. I also found a piece of indirect characterization, but not about Harry. It's about his, I suppose his cousin, Dudley. Right here, he talks about how his glasses were held together with a lot of Scotch tape because of all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. So if Dudley is showing the action of punching someone, we can indirectly infer he's a mean, rude, cruel person. All right. I never caught that before. That's cool. Some indirect characterization in there too. All right, let's look at another example. This is an example from Speak, and it has a good mix of direct and indirect characterization. I watch myself in the mirror across the room. Ugh, my hair is completely hidden under the comforter. I look for the shapes in my face. Two muddy circle eyes under black dash eyebrows, piggy nose nostrils, and a chewed up whore of a mouth. I can't stop biting my lips. It looks like my mouth belongs to someone else, someone I don't even know. I get out of bed and take down the mirror. I put it in the back of my closet, facing the wall. All right, so up here at the first part of this paragraph is a lot of direct characterization. We have muddy circle eyes, black dash eyebrows, piggy nose nostrils, chewed up horror of a mouth. All right, those are direct adjectives that show us what our character looks like. Pop quiz, is it features or nature? I hope you guessed features because features are physical. We are directly learning about the physical features of our character. Now, as we move down the paragraph, it starts shifting into indirect characterization. She says how she has this bad habit of biting her lips. She gets up, she takes down the mirror, she hides it from herself. She doesn't want to see herself. What can we infer indirectly about our character based on these actions? Well, first we can infer that she's probably a nervous person riddled with anxiety. And when people bite their lips or bite their nails, usually that indicates that they're nervous about something, that they're stressing about something. We also know that she's not very happy with her appearance. She gets down out of bed and puts her mirror away. That tells us indirectly that she probably has some self-esteem issues. She's not that happy with the way that she looks. All right. This is a really good example of how direct and indirect characterization can work together to form a really good picture of what a character looks and acts like. So there we go. Just in case we didn't catch it, there's some direct characterization about her features, because features are physical. And here is the indirect characterization. Now, this might be more about her personality, her nature, because it tells us about what's going on up here, not necessarily what's going on the outside. All right, so that was it for characterization. So on quizzes, tests, you should be able to pick out the type of characterization and even produce a paragraph that shows this type of characterization. Moving on, we're going to look at protagonist, antagonist. This should be super easy. We're going to go through it really fast because this is something we've been talking about since middle school. I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. Let's start with protagonist. So the protagonist is just another word for the main character. All right. The story focuses on this character's experiences. Usually we get the perspective of this character. We view and see the experiences of the movie through this character's eyes. Now, that does not necessarily mean the protagonist is a good guy. You know, sometimes we see the story through the perspective of a villain. A good example of this is the movie Megamind. Megamind starts off as a villain. He's not a good guy. He's breaking the law. He's planning, doing all kinds of bad things, but he's still our protagonist because he's the main character. And then we have this literary trope called anti-heroes. Anti-heroes are somewhere in the middle. They don't really have the classic heroic characteristics that we think of when we think of heroes, like bravery, strength, honesty, all that good stuff. But they are still the main characters of their stories. Think about like Deadpool, you know? He's not the best dude in the world. He's not what we think of as a classic hero or even a classic superhero. But throughout the comics, throughout the movies, he does indeed accomplish some good things. So he's right there in the middle. And we would classify him as an anti-hero. Moving on from protagonist, we have antagonist. And antagonist is simply the opposite of the protagonist. And a lot of times this is going to be a villain in some way, but not always. It's just the opponent of the main character. Think about who is standing in the main character's way. who is standing in the protagonist's way. Now, a good way to think about this is like in heist movies or in like crime movies, usually the bad guys, the people trying to steal something, are our protagonists, all right? And the antagonists, their opponents, are cops, the justice system, laws and legalities. So it's not always a villain. It's just who is ever opposite of our main character or opposite of the protagonist. Every story is going to have a protagonist. Every story has to have a main character, but not every story has to have an antagonist. There's not always going to be this one person that is standing in the protagonist's way. Sometimes it's going to be a struggle against other forces. So it might be like nature. Maybe we're out in the wild trying to survive. Maybe it's circumstance. You're struggling against poverty or the like. Or maybe it's social expectations. You're having an internal dilemma about what is expected of you in the world. So that is protagonist and antagonist. I got 3 examples here. This is the guy from Deadpool, our anti-hero Deadpool. This is the opposite. His name's Francis. This is, of course, Lord Voldemort from Harry Potter. He's the opposite of our main character, Harry Potter. And I don't know if you recognize this guy, but he is the villain in the movie Spirit. But he's opposite of our main character, the horse Spirit. All right. So this is it for protagonist, antagonist. We only have one more thing to review in this presentation, and that is point of view. Now, point of view, you should be familiar with, but out of everything that we're going to review today, it's probably going to be the most tricky to kind of wrap your brain around just because it's the most moving parts, most stuff to remember, but we will get through it together. So point of view is quite simply the perspective of the story being told. So in other words, point of view is just who is telling the story. It can be first, second, or third person. You'll notice that third person has 2 different categories, limited and omniscient. We'll talk about that when we get there. Let's start with first person. So in first person point of view, we are seeing the events of the story through the eyes of the character telling the story. So whoever's telling the story, whatever character it is, we are experiencing the story through their perspective. Here's an example right here. I nervously stepped into the classroom and glanced around. As I was timidly finding my seat, I heard a loud commotion at the back of the room. A fight suddenly broke out. I couldn't believe it. A fight! Right here in English class. I used the disturbance to my advantage. As my classmates were distracted, I slid into a seat much closer to the front of the room. Good. I didn't need to get into any more trouble after what I did last year. Ooh, what did she do last year? All right, you can see here that we are seeing the events through only one person, the person telling the story. Now, what pronoun is repeated in stories written in first person? Take a second, glance over this, and see what pronouns we are seeing over and over and over again. All right. If you guess the pronoun I, you're absolutely correct. If the narrator uses the pronoun I, the passage is in first person. So that's I, me, my, those types of pronouns. That's going to be in first person. We're hearing it from one person's point of view. All right. Let's move on to second person. Second person is a little bit trickier simply because we just don't see it that much, but we do need to review it. In second person, the narrator is speaking to you. All right. Second person is not very common. It's mainly used in like frilly works like poems and like in inspirational speeches and instructional writings like not ingredients. What is it called? Recipes. There we go. Easy way to remember is you, two. They rhyme. Second person. Second person, you, two. Easy way to remember it. So here's an example. You should first gather your ingredients before making lemonade. You will need water, lemons, and sugar. Start by squeezing your lemons. You should use the juice of at least 3 lemons, depending on how sour you like your drink. After you should add the lemon juice to 2 quarts of water. Lastly, add sugar to this mixture until your lemonade is perfect. Now, same question I asked for first person is the same question I'm going to ask here. What pronoun do we see repeated in this second person text? So let's take a second. Let's scan. Let's see what pronouns we're using over and over again. And if you guessed you are correct. It makes a lot of sense. You too, if we are using, if you are the main character, you should be the pronouns we're using. All right. So just remember you too, and we will be good. All right, last but not least, we have third person. Now remember, third person has two different layers, limited and omniscient. We'll talk about them both. In third person stories, the narrator is describing the events as a spectator. So we are on the outside looking in, all right? We're not experiencing it as a character in the story. We are not using you terms to kind of bring us into the story. We are looking into the story almost from above. So in limited third person, the narrator only sees what's in front of them. All right. They are unable to read any other character's minds. They don't know what's going on with the other characters. They only know what is going on in their mind. So an example of limited third person is Kevin liked Lauren a lot, but he couldn't tell if she liked him back. So we know about Kevin. Kevin likes Lauren, but we don't know if Lauren likes Kevin because we are only getting Kevin's perspective. Next up, we have omniscient. An omniscient narrator sees everything, not just one character's thoughts. An omniscient narrator sees inside each character's mind. Think about it as like a crystal ball with a person peering in. So if we took that limited example and made it omniscient, we could say, he thought Lauren was fantastic, but she didn't think the same of him. So what makes this omniscient is that we know that Kevin likes Lauren, but we also know that Lauren doesn't like Kevin. We're omniscient. We can see it all. All right. That one gets a little bit tricky. But as long as you're studying, as you're reviewing and looking back on examples, you should be A-okay fine. Now, what pronouns are repeated in third person stories? Take a second. Let's scan. Let's see what pronouns we're seeing over and over again. And if you guessed he, him, his, she, her, hers, they, them, you're absolutely correct. If the narrator uses these pronouns, the passage is in third person. All right. So I added also here a little chart to kind of help us review and as a quick reference for you. Point of view, first, second, third, and the pronouns you're looking for. So if we're in first person, you're looking for I, all right? Easy way to remember that. If you hold up one finger, it looks like a capital I. First person is I, me, my. Personal pronouns, all right? Remember, because you are experiencing it from one person's point of view. Second person, to you, you're going to use you, your, and yours pronouns. And third person, the one we just reviewed, that she, her, hers, and he, him, his. Alrighty? So as long as you can get those pronouns locked down, that's half the battle in deciding if a passage is in first, second, or third person. All right, before I cut you loose, I want to explain one more thing to you. Here on this last slide is the point of view practice. It has different writing prompts based on your last name. Now, if your last name is Hannah, but you really, 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 really want to write about this first one, that's fine. All right. Just write to enjoy yourself. Write something down. But you should complete this practice in your composition notebook. They are all short story prompts. Short stories can be anywhere from a page to like 3 pages. Probably wouldn't do any more than that because that's a lot of reading and we are just trying to review. That's a lot of writing too. We're just trying to review. But so write a short story about a pet in first person. Write a short story about a person finding a locked door in the third person. Write a scary story in second person. Now, this one might be a little tricky. You'd have to be like, you walk into the forest. You look around yourself and see dark shadows everywhere. You expect something to jump out, but nothing ever does. See, you have to think a little bit around where you're going to place those you pronouns. And last but not least, write a story about two people seeing each other in the third person. Now, do this in your composition notebook. And that's it. That is all we have for characterization today.